Hey everyone, my name's Alexandra Vandekamp. I'm the executive director of Gemini Inc. And this is our third Big Texas Read of 2021. I'm here with Blake Kimsey of Writing Workshops Dallas. One of the blessings of the pandemic was that Blake and David Samuel Levinson reached out to me and we started this virtual book club. And I've never had such a great time. Okay, everyone, statewide literary collaborations, great idea. Okay, so I'm here to thank our sponsors. UTSA Libraries is a sponsor. We also have Lone Star Literary in Terabang Bookshop in Dallas, the Twig Bookshop in San Antonio, Shop Independent Local Bookstore, everyone. And we're just thrilled to have Amanda Eyre Ward here talking about her latest novel, Jet Setters. I love the names of all the chapters in your book, Amanda. And we have a wonderful featured moderator, Sheila Black, who is an award-winning poet in her own right, and she actually is the previous executive director of Gemini Inc. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to David Samuel Levinson. He will be introducing Amanda as well as Sheila. And Gemini Inc. just loves nights like tonight where we're bringing great writers together with readers, and just enjoy yourself. We do ask you to stay muted while the featured author and moderators speak. There will be a general audience Q&A for the last half an hour. So post questions in the chat and let's get this show begun. So did I just say begun?
Yes.
Let's get this show going. So David, I leave it to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna intro Sheila. I'm very happy to have them both on and was very, very excited when Amanda said yes and Sheila seconded the motion. These are two amazing writers, and Sheila Black is the author most recently of a chapbook, All the Sleep in the World, from Alla Brava Press. Her fifth full-length book, when do you people sleep? Her fifth full-length book, Vivisection, is forthcoming from Salmon Poetry. Poems and essays have appeared in Puerto del Sol, The Spectacle, the Birmingham Review, Poetry, the Southampton Review, the Kenyon Review Online, the New York Times, and elsewhere. She received a 2012 Witter Brenner Fellowship from the Library of Congress, for which she was selected by Philip Levine. She works for AWP and is a co-founder of Zoglasia, a nonprofit that strives to build a community for disabled poets. She lives in San Antonio, Texas. And Sheila is our moderator. And now I will introduce our gorgeous featured writer. Her name is Amanda Eyre Ward. And she's the author of Sleep Toward Heaven. First of all, let me just say, Amanda is the most prolific writer I know, I think. Having written, what, Amanda, 9 novels? Is that right? 9? I mean, it's amazing. I'm really it's fantastic.
One's nonfiction and one's short stories, but yes.
I mean, 9 books.
Yeah.
With a 10th on the way.
Oh, I've written more than 9.
You've written more than 9.
But they are in a pile in the garage, some of them.
Gotcha. Amanda is the author of Sleep Toward Heaven, How to Be Lost, Love Stories in This Town, Forgive Me, Close Your Eyes, The Same Sky, The Nearness of You, and her latest is called The Jet Setters. Her best-selling novels have been featured in People Magazine, The New York Times, and more. Amanda's work has been optioned for film and television and translated into 15 languages. She lives in Austin, Texas, and Ouray, Colorado. Amanda currently writes every morning and spends afternoons with her children, which is sweet. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I am so excited to be here with everybody, and especially with Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Sheila. It's so good to see you all, and thank you for having me.
I know. I have a couple of revelations for the audience. One is that Amanda and I both have accounts with the shameful tagline Hotmail, which may be because we actually met in graduate school. And Amanda was actually the first person to welcome me into the MFA program at the University of Montana. And she introduced me to all the bars there. And so it's just a thrill, a great thrill to be here and to talk about Amanda's amazing book. And so, Amanda, I'm going to launch into a question.
I was worried when you said you had something shameful to share.
No. Hotmail. Hotmail is our shame.
I introduced Andrew Sean Greer at the library here in Austin. I read from letters that he had written me, and one of them in Montana, or an email, said we should wear all plaid tonight or something like that. So I'm glad I have my old notes. I hope.
I might somewhere, Amanda, but I'm going to leave those out. Hey, do you want to start by just reading like a paragraph from the book?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
I think that would be a fun scene setting before we go into the fun stuff. And Blake, because you're the control with all the hosting control, you can mute me and then unmute me if you want. Well, no, I'll just stay quiet.
Good, right?
Yeah.
Well, yes, and I love that Alexandra mentioned the section heads, which I love doing. And then they did this beautiful interior design that makes it look like luggage tags, which was fun. Because the first section is called baggage, because these people have a lot of baggage. So the Jet Setters is about a dysfunctional family on a cruise ship. Let's see. So I'll start with a paragraph from the prologue where the father, who is depressed, and this is when they're all little kids, he's trying to take a picture of the family. And Lee, the daughter, yearns to make things okay, but they're not okay when they're kids. Lee smiled with brilliance, hoping to make her father proud. This day and the 2 more excruciating days that followed, days of sand and beer-scented misery, would be the last time Lee went on vacation with her mother and siblings until 30 years later when they became jet setters. And then we skip 32 years till they are about to go jet set in Europe.
It's really struck Amanda, what a perfect setup for a novel this is. And maybe it's all the watching Masterpiece Theater that's made me secretly long to go on a Viking River cruise. But I was dying to pick up this book and read it just from that setting of a cruise ship. So could you talk a tiny bit about how you came up with that idea, and maybe just a couple of sentences about what that idea kind of meant to you, like why it was, it's just an exciting idea to have a family on a cruise ship. So how'd you get the idea?
You know, there's a few answers to that question. And the one that sounds most literary, which is true, is that my favorite I hear myself. Is it annoying, everyone?
I will mute.
Okay, the most literary answer is that there's a David Foster Wallace essay about a cruise ship, which is one of the most hilarious and profound things I've ever read. And I loved that essay so much that I've had it in my mind to try to set a story on a cruise ship ever since I read it. It was published in Harper's. And I can try to remember the title of it, but you can find it online. And, it's David Foster Wallace on a cruise ship. It's genius. And then the other non-literary part of the answer is that a lot of my books have been pretty dark. And 2 books ago, I set a book at the Texas-Mexico border, The Same Sky. And I interviewed unaccompanied migrant children for a year in Brownsville and San Diego. And it was dark and hard. And I'm very proud of that book and the ability to bring a story of one of those children out. But honestly, I kind of needed a break. And so I was flipping through a travel magazine and there was a picture of a cruise ship balcony. And I thought, I really want to be there. So I hatched an idea to set a novel on a cruise ship. And as soon as my editor said she liked the idea, my husband, Tip, Sheila, I said to Tip, I have to spend our savings going on a cruise ship. And Tip said, I'd rather be shot than go on a cruise. So I took my 2 boys and we went from Athens to Barcelona on the Carnival Vista, which had just been built to go to Galveston as a party boat. They were doing a few short itineraries in Europe. So it was $300 for 10 days.
I am so proud of Tip and you for doing that. And you know, it's really interesting you said you sort of wanted to break from this darkness, because I think one of the things I really love about this book is it felt like a little bit of a Trojan horse book, because you pick up a book called The Jet Setters and you have the settings and you take us very funnily and beautifully and hilariously through the crazy things you do on a cruise ship and also the settings. And I admired, what I liked though was there was sort of there's a lot of darkness in this book as well. And yet it's set right up against this sort of cruise ship fantasia. Like you have one line in the book where somebody's feeling, I think it's Reagan, she's feeling something fabulous. And it's a kind of a weird mixture of melancholy and fabulous. Did you find that in a weird way that the fanciful setting also gave you a new angle to get at kind of gritty family issues? Because there's a lot in the book about the way we connect and miss each other.
That is a beautiful way to say it. You know, it's true. I went on and I ended up taking a few cruises, and I'm very sort of sarcastic person, and I thought, oh, aren't these people so funny? But then the more I cruise, people really connect on those cruises. I mean, it's magical to see these families. I've only gone with my kids because my husband won't go, and I don't think he would enjoy it at all. But you have to suspend your sense of reality because there's horrors at every turn. I mean, everyone smiling and working for you sleeps below deck. So you have to be able to put that out of your mind somehow. I got to know most of the people who cleaned our rooms and stuff and interviewed them. I never got into any of the cabins. I tried, and I think they thought I was kind of creepy. But I got to know the comedians, or it's this whole world. And people connect not only because they've saved up their whole lives for this vacation, but you know, you'll see a dad who works all the time really doing a trivia contest with his kid, or trying to win. They have a little trophy that they call a piece of ship that you can win. I have one actually from a scavenger hunt. And my kids and I had so much fun. I mean, the data plans on phones are so expensive that you put them away and you really connect. So I found myself thinking a lot about that and about how we don't connect. And there is a lot of darkness in the book. And some of what I was doing, I think, and came to myself, you know, I had a rough childhood, and now I'm at a point where I have so much joy in my life. And I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about the ability to find joy after trauma. And I believe it's possible. And I think me getting sober helped me to get there. And anyway, so that was kind of what I was doing. And the cruise ship was just a place to do it.
Yeah, except I do think the cruise ship motif, in a sense, really allowed the book to have, it almost forced on the book something that I love that I think we don't see enough, which is the way the human story kind of veers between darkness and light. And I guess I hope I'm not giving away too many spoilers. I'm hoping most of the audience has read the book. But we have several siblings. We have Reagan, who's kind of the thoughtful, quote, overweight daughter. We have Lee, who's the movie star, failing movie star, who was once beautiful daughter. We have Cord, who I love, and I really want you to write a sequel. I want you to write a sequel, Amanda, because honestly, I want to know what happens to these characters.
I have an idea that they just said they don't want yet. I say yet, called Giovanni in Hawaii.
See, that's what I want. I was like, I will die if Cord and Giovanni don't get together. Well, we have a son, Cord, who is kind of there's a lot about Cord. He's a not so recovering alcoholic.
Right.
He's afraid to come out to his family. He has this great boyfriend, but he's afraid to come out. And he's also this really wonderful person in a lot of ways. And so those are the kids. And then we have Charlotte, who's the mom, who wins kind of, Amanda, this cruise.
Yeah.
And has this memory, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating for those who've all read it, of this incredible encounter with the great painter as a young woman. and has been married to Winston. One of the great subjects that I think this book takes on is family silence. There's this one great scene where Lee says, and I'm paraphrasing because can everybody, don't you think we should all, don't you think everybody should just tell the truth? And a lot of the novel revolves around various kinds of silence. And I thought that was one of the big threads that pulls the reader through. And it's very interesting because Charlotte was married to Winston, who's an alcoholic who eventually kills himself. You want to talk a little about silence in families, and it seemed very tied up with this addiction idea was silence, but silence is also something we all experience in families. How it becomes impossible to tell your parents the simplest things about yourself. And so do you want to just talk about that a little tiny bit?
Yeah, I mean, you are so smart, and it's such a
oh no, I'm not, Amanda.
in the book, because that is something I think about a lot. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up in houses where just pretending everything was okay ended up giving the kids a lot of pain, frankly. And I just did a wonderful event with Grant Ginder, who I'm a huge fan of. And he was saying how he's working on a book about how the price of keeping a secret. And I said, my God, what a wonderful thing to write a book about. And he said, that's what the Jet Setters is about, Amanda. And when I thought about it, I thought it was more about bad parenting, but it really is about the price of keeping a secret. And I think in this particular scenario, which I had to, and if you want, I can tell you more about the process of writing the book. I had to take an extra year because my editor hated the first version. And
I would love to hear about that, Amanda, because I think the audience would be interested in that.
And I'll tell you why. But anyway, I think one of the reasons I was so happy in Montana and when we met and were friends is it was the first time in my life I was surrounded by people who said it as it was, who just said when they were mad and said when they were happy and said what they cared about and were willing. And
very dramatically, I might add. Very
well, I guess, yeah. I mean, because I have a family where everything is always fine, even now. And it is very hard for me personally. My sisters are not, it seems okay to them. But now I'm in a life where I'm surrounded by people who tell the truth, and I love it so much. It's just so easy to me.
Well, I thought it was very relatable, and I almost wondered if it was a little generational. Like Charlotte is such an endearing character in some ways. Like she has that one line where she's trying to shut her kids off and she goes, Reagan, that's the daughter, let's eat some delicious bread. And I think we all have a little bit of that in us, but I think our parents' generation, and I'm older than you, but my mother was very much like the Charlotte is. Like she's less now, but there was that tremendous impetus at that era to completely act as if everything was fine all the time. As if you were really.
Have to interject that Erica Olson is here. So hi.
Oh my gosh, Erica.
Our friends.
Hi.
I haven't seen since then. So I wish. Anyway, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know how to
and I think that is a really. Hi. Yeah. But I wonder about, there is that element of, did you think Charlotte was a bad mother? I'm interested in that.
Well, I mean, and you touched on the thought of addiction, which is obviously a part of this book and my life and most of my books. But the price, I think, of keeping secrets is so painful that a lot of people, and certainly Charlotte's generation, used booze to medicate it. If you are in a situation where you don't want to be, you can leave or you can drink. Those are often your two choices. And I certainly found that in my own life. When I quit drinking, I had to learn how to leave. And I had to learn how to cancel things and only do things I wanted to do. And it is hard and upset other people, by telling my truth. And so shutting that voice up is something that a lot of people become so used to, I think. But the price of that is extremely high. And so the best part about, putting them all on a cruise ship was they were forced to be together and kind of finally talk about these things. But Charlotte as a character was already buttoned up, but then I had to make her even more so because I had to have Cord be unable to come out as gay to his mom. And in this day and age, the mom has to be pretty messed up to be someone who can't handle that information. And I needed that to happen. So I went through multiple drafts. I said earlier, read by a friend of mine who's gay and has a very healthy relationship with his parents, my best friend. And he, you know, we had to keep ramping it up. We had to make her Catholic. We had to make her really Catholic. We had to make her really Catholic. And she's best friends with her priest who will stop visiting her house if her son is gay, you know, and so her character was almost built on having to become someone you couldn't tell things to. So do I think she's a bad mother? Yes, I think she's a really terrible.
Yeah, I
terrible
do too. But what was so moving in the book for me, and it's interesting, maybe I come from like a lot of repressed Catholics who my parents left the church, but there was that feeling with that, given that Charlotte, and I love this about your characters, you have an incredible ability to make your characters likable, even when they do things we really do not like and have things about them we really do not like. Because what was very moving is you had the feeling that the reason Cord had such a hard time coming out to his mother in part, and I'm curious what you think, or if I'm just a reader going off the rails, was that he knew he knew sort of intuitively, you know, basically as a kid, what a terrible thing she'd gone through with the father. And that, so this effort of hers to make everything all right was also kind of about keeping the family together, surviving,
right.
which
And
I think was really true of that generation
I think he
post-war.
felt responsible for her.
Exactly. And so he partly,
that was unbearable.
right. So he's partly doing it out of almost an excess of love and kindness, even that prevents him from kind of going, wait a minute, this is, sorry, I was going to swear, this is so fucked up, right? This is so wrong. And that felt like a very human and real dilemma. And we see that repeated with many of the characters. For example, one of my favorite lies in the book is the implied lie of the winning the cruise.
Right.
And that's interesting that that's in there because of all the silences and lies that happen. The lie is that Lee's mother doesn't win the cruise. Her daughter, Charlotte, doesn't win the cruise, right, Amanda?
Yes, that's right.
Charlotte, Lee takes her rich ex-husband, boyfriend, partner, whatever, who's just dumped her credit card and buys it. And that was so interesting thrown in there because most of the silences and lies we definitely see as bad and destructive. But then that one appears almost like it should be, it's immoral, but you totally get it. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I tell people who would understand what this means that really the Jet Setters is about codependence on a cruise ship.
Exactly.
Here is so codependent. And what that means, as far as I understand it, and I understand it pretty well because I've studied it a lot personally, is valuing other people over yourself. And so that's what they're constantly doing in the name of love. They're choosing each other at the expense of themselves, when really if they would all take care of themselves, they would probably be a lot happier. So Lee thinking like, oh, I need to get this for my mom because she really wants to win it. And meanwhile, her mom just kind of, well, her mom does want to win it. And then the best thing about Charlotte, in my estimate, I love that she's a 70-year-old woman who gets a fabulous lover. And I have a lot of friends who are in their 70s, and I got to have some frank conversations with them about, you know, what they were seeking erotically. And it was so pleasurable, as opposed to, you know, some of the tough topics I've been dealing with, to write about an older person's love life and everybody getting pleasure.
I thought women were, you kind of, you know, jumped my next question, which was exactly that. We have 3 women in here who really feature, and in certain ways they represent collectively a lot of the issues women have, you know, and one of the great things about all 3 of them, I love that Charlotte, and by the way, the word gabardine I will never view the same way again. There's a line in there, I should find it, but what's great about all of them is in their own way they're all quite feisty about the situations they've been put in as women. We have Charlotte, who you're right. For all that she's buttoned up, she keeps reading romance novels and having kind of like
I mean, some of the
great
stuff you're referring to is a perfect example of how important it is as a new writer, as an old writer, to write as if nobody's watching, because I was cracking myself up, and then like it embarrasses me so much to hear you reference like lines like that.
But those lines were
I really write as
brilliant.
if nobody's gonna read it because I kind of convinced myself no one will.
Well, I actually felt like there was so much linguistic charm in this book and humor by using certain words like panache and gabardine and it's time to say, you remember that? And so one of the things I was really interested in is how much your humor was about almost the sound of words. I mean, I'm a poet, so I get obsessed with that, but I can't write a funny poem to save my life, which makes me really sad, Amanda, because I think I'm kind of a funny person in real life. Yeah. And then in poetry, I go totally Vedic or, whatever. But your humor is the precise turns of phrase, and it makes so many of these scenes so human. There was, for example, I'll just read a couple lines and you'll kill me, but this is an example just for the audience of how Amanda uses language to be serious, but also, and often in very serious moments, infuse them with something of the humor of real life. A break, said Charlotte. What about Jason? Lee sighed, placing her hands on either side of her plate. I guess I might as well just tell you, she said. Jason dumped me for the girl on Me and My Robot, Alexander Familiani. The girl who owns him on the show, said Cord. Lee nodded. I'm so sorry, said Reagan. He's like her pet. That about sums up the situation, said Lee. I mean, that's a really great, there's just so much kind of playfulness and great moments like that. And to get back to the women, I was really interested reading this in that element of feistiness, because I was curious. It seemed as if, we've been reading a lot in the pandemic and since Me Too, sort of about the ways women are fed up and they've sort of had it. And I felt like there was something of that energy here. Like these women had all been pushed in various ways. Charlotte generationally into the sort of wife, mother that self-sacrifices for the addicted husband. Lee's been like the beautiful girl who all her life has been told her beauty is going to take her places, and it really just kind of reduces her world. And then Reagan is Reagan is a really interesting character to me, but she's the unhappily married wife mother who's kind of in the book finding herself as sort of an artist. And I was really interested in just what you were thinking about women and their lives and their pressures, and also that where that feistiness came from, because I feel like that was something new I hadn't seen and I was excited by it.
Thank you. There's so many interesting things that you said. I'll start by saying I think I've always written funny, but the darkness has overshadowed it. I mean, my first novel, Sleep Toward Heaven, is about women on death row. But the first scene, they're getting ready for a new inmate who is called the Satan Killer, and they're making her a kind of welcome party with tang from the commissary that they mix with cream cheese to make a little cake. And so I've always kind of seen dark humor. It's just kind of the way I think. And I like reading that kind of dark humor a lot. And so I just have more and more been honing in on what I can do, I think. And I've been listening to the George Saunders book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. I was telling David that I'm just loving that book a lot, but I listened to it because it's Russian short stories, and then he analyzes them. And I just couldn't make myself read Turgenev before bed right now. But listening to Nick Offerman read me. Anyway, so George Saunders talks about how he wanted to be Hemingway, but what he could do were these weird little sci-fi things. And finally, he said he heard his wife reading one of a weird little thing, and he heard her laughing, and he realized it was the first time he had given pleasure to a reader. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I've started to feel that that's what I can do. And that's sort of my view of the world. And so I've trusted that more. And I'm lucky to have a publisher who goes with what, I mean, it was a pretty strange departure to set a book on a cruise ship, a comedic novel. I've never done that, and they went for it.
Well, I loved it because part of me feels as I get older, you know, when we were young and anguished, and you know, I was like the champion at being the arty anguished one, right?
I think I might have been.
Well, we both were. We were in a workshop together. Remember how golly, we were in this workshop together with the writer I won't name, and he would tear our stories apart, and we'd go weep in Charlie B's bar. But one thing I totally agree with you, Amanda. I tend to think that as I get older, I see more and more how important art is as a source of joy and pleasure, and how hard that is to do. I mean, why is Jane Austen so perennially popular? And she's a very serious writer in a lot of ways, but she's also very funny, you know, and also loves her characters, or at least many of them. You know what I mean?
Also, so that, you know, you're talking about that workshop, and one of the worst parts about that particular teacher, and there are many, one of the worst parts is that he would tell us what he would do.
Exactly.
In fact, Erica's here. I remember one time, I think it was Erica's story, that was a quiet story about two people talking in a restaurant, and he said something like, you should have someone with a gun come in.
Exactly. And we were
like, if she were someone else, maybe. But I mean, this idea of trusting, I mean, I'm kind of woo-woo, like trusting what you've been given. And I really felt more than any of my other books, I just got personal with this one. I was silly if I wanted to be. I wasn't trying to impress people like that professor.
And that really ties into a lot of,
and I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And it's so wonderful that that's what has brought me the biggest commercial success, because I really got to a point where I was like, I want to write what I want to read. And if, you know, fancy people don't think I'm literary and important, then to hell with them. And that's a nice place to be writing from, I think.
I also think it's a very important place for women artists, and it takes us a long time to get there.
Right. I mean, I was writing books about
war, go ahead.
And not about, as Helen Simpson, one of my favorite writers, calls it, the indoor world, you know? And meanwhile, 90% of my life is family right now. And I want to write about that. And I think it's just as important as a lot of other things. But I want to be sure to answer, to talk, because you were talking about female characters, but all the characters in the book, I'll just tell you, and we can follow up on this if there's time. I handed in the book, and my editor said, I don't care about any of these characters. You need to make me care about them. And I was like, I completely didn't get it. I thought I thought it was a triumph. I honestly did. And she was like, I don't care about any of them. So everyone, I can tell you a different story about how I had to make them deep, complex, interesting. Didn't have the plan about leaving her husband. So
how interesting.
She was just a woman who was being
interesting. Is your sound okay, Amanda, or is it just me?
My friend we had this, I remember live, and I talked with her for like, wait, is my internet on? That one of my kids is playing video games. Can you hear me? I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I'm hearing you, but you were going out for a minute.
Okay, I bet one of my sons is playing video games.
Yeah, but yeah,
okay.
Or one of my husband or something. I think it's you, but it was great. I think that, and that is actually part of our Zoom life, is that the internet goes unstable for reasons we can't understand.
So for example, I had to do. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I had to go through every character and learn how to build a complex character, and everyone has a different story. But I was emailing all my friends, you know, from Meg Wolitzer to Paula McLean, anybody, and I was like, how do you make a good character without without a murder mystery, because all of my books have always had the plot be the main engine. And I had to teach myself how to make the characters be the engine. I thought the 10 cruise ship stops were enough, but they were not. And so for one thing, I had to slow down and what felt to me like overwrite everything. And I remember sending it to Andrew Sean Greer and I said, my God, is this so overwritten or what? And he said, it's Elizabeth Strout. It's the best thing you've ever done. And I was like,
well, you know, I was going to second them because there was no character that I didn't care about and also that didn't surprise me. Like one of my favorites was actually Reagan, Amanda, partly because she's becoming sort of an artist, right? Like you really get that. And I felt like it was such a surprising view, not a cliche view of what that is. Like the parts of her that were sort of controlling and wanting order were the artistic parts. Does that make sense? And I love that because it was kind
yes,
of
the Reagan story is, gosh, I feel like I'm
no, you're okay.
The Reagan story was that she was a person who was being cheated on, basically. And I rewrote it. And I don't know if you all heard me say this. I called my friend Venda Lavita and I was lying on my couch upstairs and we talked for like 2 hours about Reagan. And finally she said, you know what, Amanda, and this is what I'm so thankful to have friends like this. She said, there's nothing else to do. It's just that we've read it before. She said, every scene with Reagan is perfect. It's agonizing. It's heartbreaking. I just have read this story. And that was so honest and wonderful. It's like one time Bill Kittredge said to me, Amanda, I can't read another draft of this story. The story's good. It's never going to be great. Stop kicking a dead horse. So I had to make Reagan's story fresh. And so by having her plotting all of that underneath and ramping up Matt's violence, I think I was able to make it something you hadn't read before. And with the artistic, I knew she did paint your own pottery.
You did a great job with that. Which was the most fun for you to write of the characters and why?
Giovanni.
I thought so.
Cord's fiance is my favorite person. Cord is, I mean, I say that my friend Clay helped me, but Cord is really me, you know? Really me. And so writing his fabulous, fun fiance, who's just young and untroubled and millennial, I loved him. And I love him renting the golf cart in Rome. I couldn't wait to get there.
I felt the same way about him. In fact, the one thing I was going to say, and I was scared of giving a spoiler, is Amanda, I'm going to die if I don't know if Giovanni and Cord get together in the end.
Yes, of course they do. So the book
I know
is that Giovanni, it's called Giovanni in Hawaii. I mean, I have not written a word of it yet, but my thought is that Giovanni falls in love and he's getting married in Hawaii and all the Perkins go to stop the wedding for Cord.
Oh, that's a great plot because can I tell you one of my favorite scenes in the whole book? And I also like the guy in Malta, Kiko.
Oh yes, Kiko. So Lee used to go back to Malta. There's a whole, I can send you 50 pages of her becoming a scuba diving guide in Malta.
Well, I liked both those characters because they were like the joy characters, you know? They were like the joy characters. But what I also loved is that one of my favorite scenes is when Reagan and Giovanni go out to lunch. Yeah. And I love that scene because you've had this, I called it the Trojan horse thing where it's quite a serious moving. There's violence in that book. There's sadness. There's like the horror of Cord, you know, giving that thing where he can't remember the product he saw. That was a genius move. And, you know, he's got this whole IPO with this product he doesn't remember. That was amazing. But there's this scene where Reagan and Giovanni go out to lunch and, you know, Giovanni and Cord are broken up. Reagan has to kind of speak for her brother, but she can't. And there's a couple of things. Giovanni doesn't try to fix everything for her, which was really like a great moment somehow. He says, it's kind of up to you to figure it out. And then at the end, when she doesn't know how to answer if he should get back together with Cord or not, or how to argue for it. And she just says, well, I love him and he's a wonderful person. That was a very moving moment in the book because it had that sort of darkness light set against it. But there's times when maybe that's what a cruise ship's about. You just have to kind of accept what is, right?
Yeah, and life.
In life and in family. And that was felt very true. But I also really loved Lee. I mean, she had a lot of all of us in her, you know, the kind of where you have to change your expectations and move on.
Yes.
And so, in a sense, you have all these characters whose lives are about to undergo fundamental shifts, and you kind of catch them in this moment, which is really great. You know, there's a really great question in the chat from Heather, and I thought I'd start throwing in some questions from people. Her question, Amanda, is what do you think it takes to get to that place of true authenticity and not worrying about what publishers want? Do you think that just comes with time and many words on the page? That can be a really hard jump for a lot of writers. And I have to say, Heather's right. It is a hard jump. What do you think?
You know, I think that's a great question. That's the essential question, really. And for me too, obviously. I truly believe, and I have seen this in every case, that when you decide to write the story you're given, that only you can write, you'll get success, commercial success. Because trying to write what is currently selling well is just never going to happen. And you can write a book that seems like the most commercial thing in the world, and it can tank. And you win if you're writing what you love. If you make yourself proud, you win. And you don't win otherwise. I mean, you're miserable. I know writers who make a ton of money who are miserable churning out the crap they have to churn out. And I know people, and so Andy really inspired me. He wrote less. And when I started reading it, I thought, this is him. After all the years I've known him and the stuff he was writing, Less was him not trying to be literary, just telling his own story in his hilarious voice. And the irony that he won the Pulitzer is just so, it's not irony, it's the greatest thing that he wins, you know? And so he inspired me to kind of stop trying to impress everybody. I wasn't even trying to figure out what would sell. I was trying to be impressive. I was trying to have people say, God, what a good writer Amanda is, rather than saying, oh, I care about these characters, or I'm crying because it's bringing up something for me. I wasn't trying to move anybody. My goal was for people to be like, well, that is an amazing sentence. And that's sort of what I was taught for my goal to be, I think. And sometimes the most moving stuff, the sentences are not impressive. They are a vehicle that's getting you to the emotion and the heart of the story, which is what moves readers, which is what sells. And I know a million editors and agents, and what they want is to be riveted and moved. And I think you can only move people with the stories you're given or the emotions you've been given. I really believe that. And so writing what only you can write is the way to do it.
I completely think that's true. And I think it's also when the reader feels the most like kind of translucency of voice. Like they're not thinking, oh, this is a well-crafted sentence. They're thinking they're hearing the authentic sort of voice of the writer. Like, did you watch the Hemingway series, Amanda, on PBS? No, it was really fascinating and tragic in some ways, because you have this person who begins as a very gifted writer, and if anything moves in the opposite direction, you know, which we kind of feel, you know, as far as the writing, and becomes kind of obsessed with the myth. There's a great question from Wandra. Hi, Amanda. I read The Same Sky and the Jet Setters. How did the Jet Setters get chosen by Reese Witherspoon's book club? Did you submit?
Well, let me just say that has been an incredible thing that's happened with this book. I don't submit. I honestly don't know who does. I don't know anything about it. It's a scout that found it. So I guess she has people working for her who are scouts. So I was we have an Asian day spa down the street where you can go get a back rub for $20, and I had finished some work and decided to get a back rub. So I remember in pre-pandemic you could go.
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, I could go again now that I'm vaccinated. So I turned my phone off and I had the back rub. When I turned it back on, there were 5 messages from Random House, and that does not happen to me very often. So they were all from my editor, and I called her back and she said, okay, I need to call you back when everyone's in the room. And because the book hadn't come out, I didn't know what it could be. So they all got in the room and they said, you're going to be Reese's pick for March. And I didn't really know even what it meant at the time. I knew it was good. And so I had a dinner party right before the book came out with Clay and Tomas and one other couple. And this was the last, and then the weirdest thing is the pandemic. So that was the last time I saw anyone for a year. So it came out and immediately hit the Times bestseller list. And then they put it in every airport in the world, and then every airport in the world shut down. So it was just surreal. It was crazy. But I've met her since in some Zooms, and she is a genuine reader, and they gave me all her picks as a present, and they're always sending presents all the time. It's insane. And like this reading box, I don't know where I put it. I posted about it, but yeah, this box with candles and chocolate and all this stuff. Anyway, and all her picks are really great stories. I mean, they're very different, but they're all unputdownable reads. And so I've loved reading them all because they're really, I don't know whether it's her or it seems like it's actually her, but anyway, I'm really honored. And at Random House, apparently when they announced it, one of the sales guys said, I've been selling Amanda for 20 years and it's finally her. And, this ties into my embrace of sort of middle age and the gifts I've been given. And it's like, wow, it's incredible.
Amanda, that's amazing. And it's sad about the pandemic, but a lot of people are reading the book. I would think in some ways that many people would want to read it just for that sense of moving through. Did you do much research on place for the book? Was that part of the cruises because one of my favorite things was your tour of Pompeii, where I thought that was an amazing part of the book. And just talk about place in the book and the Pompeii scene, if you like.
I'd love to, because it was so fun. And actually, that's something I'm going to do again, is set books in places I want to go to, because it's really wonderful. And so I booked this cruise. And first of all, the first emails to my editor, I was like, where should the cruise be? Alaska, Hawaii, what should we do? And she said, Europe. So I said, okay. And I wrote the book, and I did all the character research, and I wrote until they boarded the ship. But I had never been on a cruise ship. So by the moment I got on the cruise ship, I was taking pictures of the flooring and the sconces on the wall and all. And so one of my sons said, Mom, if someone found your phone, they'd think you were crazy. Because I have no family photos, or it's like close-ups of the buffet serving tools, things like that. And then we later went on 2 more cruises, a Caribbean and another one. Once I realized that the cruise can take care of your kids while you work, it was like what I did instead of summer camp for them, because you have to get out of Texas or do something with your kids. So it's cheaper to go on a cruise than to put them in camps and stay in Texas. But the European scenes, it was funny because I think the tone of the book was a bit darker when I started. I kept writing scenes of the refugees because one of the bays in Athens where our cruise ship was docked, the other one was holding Syrian and Greek refugees. So since I had written The Same Sky, I was very acutely aware of that. And if a cruise ship comes upon a refugee boat that is ailing, by maritime law, they have to take them on. So there was this whole other piece about a family taken on in the ship. And then my editor said, look, you wrote the last refugee book. Like, this is your fun book, Amanda. So I kept having to remind myself that. But I signed up for all these crazy bus tours, which are so expensive. And it was just amazing. I mean, I've never had a lot of money, and it was really fun to be able to take my kids on those. and, you know, underground, the Colosseum in Rome and the Pompeii tour. And so as I went on them, I took notes and also took weird pictures and thought about what scenes would take place and why in those particular outings and what would happen to each character. And then we ended up, Turkey got canceled because there was a coup in Turkey. So the cruise ship like hung out. They had a day of fun with ice sculptures and like hairy body contests. And so it's like so surreal. The surreal world of the fun ship, you know, it's pretty crazy and interesting.
I thought it was fascinating, and it provided such an amazing emotional counterpoint, because it was kind of like on steroids what we all experience in normal life. Like something's going on, but we have to go to the bake sale. But it was crazy. Like, let's make towel animals. Let's have a hairy chess contest.
Yeah.
Let's have crazy art with Robert De Niro everywhere. So it was great. Yeah, I think
I'm glad you saw that, because Sheila, a lot of people, and this is what happens when you hit something like Reese, people buy, and the cover, people buy this and they have no, I've had readers who write me that seem to have no conception of the darkness in the book, or the Amazon reviews, the first 3 reviews are people who feel like, what the hell? I bought this for a fun book and it's not fun at all. And that's such a weird thing that happens when they package your book. You know, they make a reader think a certain thing. But anyway,
Well,
glad that you
I do think it's a fun book, but it's also kind of a serious lit book. I mean, I actually thought it was far more like what used to be called, well, you know, I kept thinking of people like Barbara Pym or Jane Austen or people like that who write books that are basically going yes to life, but they have a lot of darkness in them. And when you look at them closely, because they're true to life, I mean, there's nobody here, I'm sure, who doesn't have family issues or family silences or family grief or major disappointments in life. And I think that what the cruise and the moment they were in allowed you to do was we're kind of hopeful about every character's trajectory the way they are, even though we don't necessarily think it's all going to work for them. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to come out like perfectly or the way they expect, but we don't feel, and I do feel we have a prejudice a bit in our literature. I know you and I have talked about this, Amanda, and I tend to think it's partly men's literature versus women's in the past, though I hope that's changing, for the big serious American novel to be unrelentingly serious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we tend to view literature as being in a package where it's either serious all the way through or it's funny and light, and never shall the twain mix, which is kind of ironic because, you know, all of us in life have that kind of mixture of absurdity and fun and then seriousness kind of all the time, 24/7. And I thought that you should feel proud that this book, I mean, I didn't read the Amazon reviews, so I don't know, but you should feel proud that this book struck in between those two in a way that was very real and felt. And I think that's why it's been like a bestseller and everything. You know, people felt it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I want to switch gears a tiny bit. You've given really great advice on that need for an authentic voice, but you're also someone who's written 9 novels, which many of us, like me, who's never written one, but lots of poems, would imagine is impossible. But what would be just quickly your advice for some people writing, you know, any aspiring novelists out here in the audience? What have you learned? We were in grad school together. We were starting out. We were babes writing. What have you learned in all those years since that you think are like?
I was never taught how to write a novel in grad school. I took short fiction classes, and great advice I got from Bill Kittredge was to stop working on my short stories for my thing that was going to be bound in the library, my thesis.
Mm-hmm.
Just work on your novel. Like, you have another year, you need to graduate with a novel. But I didn't know how, and I was kind of taught if you write beautiful pieces, they organically become a novel. And so my first novel is not a novel, it's just a bunch of pretty pages that don't go anywhere. And so I had to read novels and dissect them and teach myself structure. But the best advice I have, there's an old book that's called The Weekend Novelist, and it lays out the 3-act structure. And I've taught this for Gemini Inc., the 3-act structure, because there is a structure and specific scenes. There are specific scenes, like 10 of them, that need to happen at certain plot points. And once you lay that out, it gives you a framework, which I never had. And so once I got that, every one of my books, I use that diagram. And I teach now, and we only meet 6 times a year. And I'm literally like, you have to write between plot point 1 and the end of act 1 by May, and we'll talk then, you know, and kind of talk you through it. So the 2 pieces are, for one thing, for that book for $2, you can get the structure, and that's incredibly useful. The other thing is giving yourself deadlines, because when I teach my class, I charge a lot of money because I think people need someone to care that they're working on their novel. And I think it's very important to be realistic about your schedule. People will start the class and say, I'm going to get up at 2 a.m. 3 days a week. And I'm like, you're not going to do that. So say you're going to write every Saturday 5 pages, you know, you'll eventually get to a novel, which is a lot better than, you know, you have to enjoy it along the way and make it a realistic part of your life and get those pages done, because it's a lot more fun to work on a complete novel than it is to have a perfect 40 pages, which I have a lot of friends from grad school, really smart people who have beautiful, I would say 40 pages, because around 40 pages is when, if you don't have the plot structure, you just start kind of casting about. So I was sort of bullheaded enough to finish a novel without any structure, but it's terrible. So, I mean, you can take the most literary writers in the world, but they understand this structure. It's just, and you can use it. It's at least for your first novel.
I think I love that, because even as a poet, I've had to learn to set up structured processes for myself. And I love also, you know, and I'm terribly disorganized, as you know, Amanda, like,
so
you know,
only thing
poetry,
right. Everything
yeah.
else falls apart.
But I like also that realistically fitting it into your life. And I guess for me, one thing the part about joy, you have to take some pleasure in it. I think that that's something, we're a Puritan culture, and we often make people feel that if you're suffering, you're getting somewhere. But in writing, there has to be the part where you kind of let yourself go and enjoy it, even if you're rigorous with yourself outside of that writing period. Don't you think? Do you find that?
Absolutely. And that's this, the Jet Setters wouldn't exist without that exact philosophy. You know, I kind of wanted to see a cruise ship, and I'm puritanical enough that I would never pay to do it if it weren't work related.
I know, I'm the same way. Yeah.
In a million years. So I got to go do all of these things. And like Andy said to me once, you know, it's all grim. Writing is so hard. Sending it out is so hard. Rejections are so hard. Every piece of it. So he was saying that he goes out to lunch with people. And I was sort of marveling that he does this, like goes out to lunch with people. And he said it can be so hard. All you have are the lunches. And so I've started to do that. I know so many writers in Austin now, because if I hear a writer, you know, moves to town, I'll email them and say, do you want to go to lunch? And there's a restaurant near my house, and I splurge once or twice a week and go meet a writer. And it's made my life really wonderful, surrounding myself with other writers just by letting myself pay for lunch.
And have some fun. Okay, so back to the book really quickly. And I wanted to say, I'm hoping people will start posting questions in the chat, because, you know, Amanda and I, as you might have guessed, can talk for a long time and enjoy it. But we'd love to hear your questions. I have a question from David. Did the Jet Setters ever have a different title? And did you ever feel like giving up?
Those are 2 great questions. To the first, yes, I sold this book. I sold this book with the title Nude in Rome. And I wish it were still called that, to be honest, because it's about, you know, Charlotte has an affair with basically, it is Picasso, who was such a scumbag. Wow. And so it was supposed to be that there had been a painting painted of her by Picasso called Nude in Rome. So that was the original title, which honestly I adore. And in terms of giving up, that, David, is the best question ever. I mean, I have almost given up on everything so many times. 2 books ago, I worked on a book for 2 years, and I never finished it. It sucks. And I have writer friends who just said it's not going to work. I did it 100 different ways. It has a fire and a marriage, and it's just, it doesn't work. And it has so many drafts that once I was at Yaddo, and this guy who does conceptual art was like, I should make an art piece about that novel because it goes in so many directions, and the characters are, it's like, they're gay, no, they're not. They get married, no, there's a fire. They die in the fire, no, they set the fire. That he could make some sort of interactive thing. Anyway. And then this book, when I heard back that the editor hated it, I was at a writing retreat called Sewanee, and I didn't have cell service. So my editor, and I thought, I've handed in the book, now I'm going to start something new in this wonderful week away, or 2 weeks. And my editor, I drove to meet my editor. I had parked outside Piggly Wiggly, not to meet her, to call her. And she called me and said, it's terrible. She hated it. I cried so hard. She just said, I don't like any of the characters or the setup, really. And so I went back to that lonely writing retreat, and I, within a day, was like, well, I'm going to show her wrong. And I hired a plot doctor who told me the same thing. You cannot fix this. Why would they go on this cruise? It's just not going to work. And I decided I would make it work. And I did. I mean, I was sure. And when I called Andy said I would have cried for a month. I was like, I don't have a month. So I made that work.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. I would have cried for a month, but there is that feeling, there's always some thread. Like, did you have one image? I often find when I'm writing something that I can't get right, there's one image or idea that's pulling me through. Did you have something like that with this book?
I do with all the books. And I think the one, so, to answer your question, David, I did give up on that other one. I abandoned it. And I still think about it. In every interview I've done in the last 5 years, I've asked if people have abandoned a novel. No one seems to have, but me. But anyway, yeah, with the Jet Setters, well, I knew these characters and I thought they were deep and complex and interesting. And so for my editor to say, I don't like them, I thought, well, the failing is me bringing them to life. It's not them. It's not the book. It's that I have not conveyed what I see. And so I had to figure out how to do that. And a lot of it, as I said, was this, what still feels to me like overwriting.
Yes, but it's interesting. You did hit this moment where you didn't tell us everything that happens to them, and they're all left in a place where they're moving forward or moving out of the frame, and we're really still curious, which is why, again, Amanda, I want you to write a sequel. So I think that, did you have a lot of drafts, a lot of things you cut back or left out? Was it a bigger book that you brought down, or was it really?
No, it always had the structure of Athens to Barcelona. And I knew in Barcelona they would see the nude in Rome painting of Charlotte. But originally I did have money. I kept trying to move around like a King Lear scenario. But so I didn't know what would happen, but I knew that structure. And then at one point, half the book was going to be Charlotte's past, because I thought I'd do historical. And that went like the 2 pages in the book. I hate writing historical, so that didn't work.
But you have a lot of generational presence there. We haven't talked about Charlotte's mother, Louisa, but is that her name, Louisa? Yeah. Charlotte's mother, who doesn't appear that much, still becomes such a big explanation for why Charlotte's the way she is. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to this woman, Lisa Crone, I don't read any craft stuff. I kind of go with a gut, but I read, I don't know where, she was on a panel and she talked about this idea that she writes about in her book called Story Genius, which honestly, the book just becomes confusing. But I love this concept about misbelief. So her idea is the character over the course of a novel has a misbelief that is keeping them from what they want in life. And the novel will force them to write that misbelief. And then you have to write the scene that caused the misbelief. So I thought that was pretty cool. And now I do that and teach my students to do that. So for Charlotte to think that she was someone who had no self-worth, that's her misbelief. by the end of the book, that will be overturned. And the scene where she starts to believe that was Louisa.
Right. And that made so much sense because, as you said, that Charlotte wasn't a great mother. She had an even worse mother. And that to me was kind of moving. Like, you know, we kind of feel like we're on this generational plan to work out all our family issues. You know what I mean? Like maybe new ones come up, but there's some sort of forgiveness between generations sometimes. Like Louisa seemed like a really narcissistic mother. You know what I mean? Whereas Charlotte was a mother who meant well, but did a lot of harm by not being able to be honest. There's a nice question from Alexandra. She says, I'm always intrigued about novel openings, possibly because as a poet, I can have a hard time with the beginnings of my own poems. But what gave you the idea to begin your prologue and the first chapter baggage with the family portrait of Charlotte and her family at Hilton Head Beach? For a novel entitled Jet Setters, it's interesting to have us begin with the stillness of a portrait. That's a great observation, I think.
Really, it's an incredible observation. And by the way, Alexandra, thank you for all your comments throughout. It is so wonderful to be speaking and to have someone say that's an interesting point. It's like, oh.
Yeah, it makes you feel much better. Yeah.
So much. Yeah, so actually the prologue is the last thing I wrote of this book.
Oh.
It used to all start with them. And then when I had to go back and spell out all their childhood trauma, that's really what it is. The characters were behaving in ways that to my editor, who does not have childhood trauma, made no sense. They were just obnoxious or flawed in a way she didn't understand. But when I had to go explain all the childhood trauma that made them that way. And then they become more sympathetic. And so starting with them in trauma, I hoped, a moment from sadness then gives you an enormous amount. The reader has some sympathy going in. So when they are acting flippant or unloving, the reader, just from those few pages, my hope was that they would think, oh gosh, these poor people who don't know how to love, rather than I don't care about these people.
Oh yeah, I never felt like I don't care. I think what's nice about Alexandra's observation, though, is that there is this thing between the movement of the jet setting and the fixity of the emotional situations they're in, where you see these repeated attempts to break free. And, when Lee says, can you just tell the truth? Or they're all saying, tell her, and he can't. Or when Lee is beginning to feel like she should be more responsible. I love that she lived on what did she live on? Cocaine and something really crazy. What was it?
I can't remember actually. I had never been to LA when I wrote this book. Another ironic thing, because now I get to go a lot for the book.
Right.
I had a friend, Leah Stewart, who wrote a book about an actor, and she did all this extensive research, and I kind of stole a lot of it.
Well, you did it totally.
It's like, and then now I'm in LA and I meet actresses who are like, oh God, Lee is so realistic. And I'm like, I had no idea. How auditions work and how you try to transform yourself into someone else to be what you think they want you to be. It's really fascinating.
It is really fascinating. And it was also fascinating that Lee's actually not that interested in it, which I found really moving, because I could totally see that. Like being an actor to me would be, it seems like it's a very specific thing that you're either able to kind of let go of yourself that way, or it's sort of this weird ritual that it becomes ever more elaborate. And the book did a great job. But, you were totally convincing about LA. I've been a few times and it convinced me. But I think that's one of the miraculous things about fiction. I remember, the writer John Berger, he once, said he'd done all this. He said writing is so strange. He'd written this novel set in Hungary, right after World War II. And somebody said, you captured it exactly. And he was completely mortified because he thought he'd made it all up. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow. Yeah, my family will say to me, because I don't remember a lot, which I guess is classic childhood trauma. I just have very weird non-memories. And so my sisters will say to me, that happened. Or like that happened, but then this didn't happen.
That's happened to me as a poet. I'll write something, I'll think I'm making up narrative, and find out it happened or something like it happened. So we're
Have you ever
tricking
had
up.
it happen? One of the weirdest things that's happened to me as I've gotten older is I read a lot as a kid. I read more than I did anything else, and I still do. And I would place fictional novel, I would place them in a house in my head that I thought was inspired by the book. But then I realized houses we went on vacation to, or houses we came in.
That has happened. Something like that has happened to me.
Oh my God, I've set so many novels here that I've read. They've been in this kitchen and it's real.
Yes, that has happened to me. And I think it's just fascinating that imagination can be so powerful. I have a great question or observation too by David Levinson. He said, also, we're always taught to keep the story moving, and a cruise is a stationary beast, which makes your job that much harder, I imagine. Did you ever see the ship as a stage? Which I love, because in some ways I would say yes.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, I actually haven't thought about it, and I haven't written plays. I love plays. I like musicals too, but I like plays the best. And the cruise has all these different places where things can take place. They're so weird and interesting. So I never actually thought about it that way, but now I do, now that you say it, because it was easy to know where certain revelations should take place on the ship, and they could run into each other and stuff. And they were forced to be together because there's nowhere to go. And you could bring in all these other characters. But one of the other problems my editor had with the manuscript she hated of the Jet Setters was that she was mad that some of the important characters weren't there. So I had to put Matt on the ship. And I hate Matt, the bad husband, Reagan's bad husband. I had to put him on the ship, and he had to come along. And I didn't want to rewrite all the scenes on the ship, so I just made him be like, "Oh, I'm not going to Rome," because I didn't want to rewrite it. And Giovanni had to show up, and more. And then so Giovanni always showed up, but then he disappeared. So now I made him stay and like go dancing on the ship late at night and stuff.
But those changes seem like
people in.
Yeah, well, in a way, a novel is like a stage in the sense that often when you're revising, don't you find you have to make more overt things that you kind of in your early drafts want to suggest? But, like Giovanni's there, you're talking about him, but you have to bring him on stage,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's bad writing to just sort of have all the important scenes happen on the phone.
Or in the character's heads. So I think that's
the cruise ship that there were no phones. I have to say.
And you hated Matt. I thought one of the most interesting things you did, one interesting thing, because you have different perspectives throughout the book, which gives you the advantage of telling stories from different people's point of view. And we get a lot of, it's neat because we're always peeling back, Reagan thinks Lee's this horrible person, and then Lee thinks Reagan this, and between the sisters. But Matt was interesting because you begin to think he's so terrible and sinister because Court, it's telling, wants to protect his sister, and he is hurting his sister. But by the end of the novel, he isn't as big a villain as he seemed at the start. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and he gets his comeuppance.
I mean, he's still a bad guy, but he's interesting. I was going to ask one, just to kind of, I know we're getting on time, and I'm hoping people will ask more questions, but just to kind of sum up for the audience, I read in the back that the themes of this book were, love and truth, which is a little vague, but I thought we definitely. The paperback, yes.
Oh, that thing, yeah. I was like,
yeah.
That is not a theme.
I know. I was like, that's a pretty big theme, but I was interested.
That's because I got big enough that I was like, I'm not writing the back matter anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Love guide. No.
Well, they write that. And I thought, yes, in a way, truth and love, yes. But I thought, well, Amanda, we could do better than that. Truth and love are big, but let's get more nitty gritty. What are we've touched on it a lot, but what for you in the end was the thing you'd sort of like a reader to take away from this book and these characters' various trajectories?
I mean, what I said is something that is the most important message in the world to kids like me, grown up or not grown up, that you can have trauma and what we now call trauma, but you can feel like you're never going to get out of a childhood, even after you physically left. But you can. When you get joy, you can have that, and you're going to be okay. Like that. That's really what it's about to me.
I agree. And you give some pretty, some specific examples of that. And so, for example, to me, a big scene is, and what are the ways you think people get out of that? I can give examples from your book, but I'm interested what you would say.
For me, it would be like that scene with Ford where he has this little boy inside him that sort of has what he calls the lonely voice.
That was great. Yes.
Finally stands up for that boy and listens to him, and mainly listens to him, allows himself to hear what was so painful, because it's painful to hear that little boy inside him. So I think by listening, you feel the pain of the past, but then it also opens everything, like all your sensors open up to joy.
And it's a kind of a thing where for all of them, you're right. It's this pain that keeps them from doing the things they actually want to do. Like in a more, almost like a comic foil to that moment with Cord. Who was he the easiest character? Was he kind of your favorite character to write?
Well, he was the one who's me. So I don't know that I'd say favorite, because it's kind of hard to try to.
No, you like them all, but yeah.
It was fun to kind of bring him to a place where he got over it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's one that we feel a lot for. But one of my favorite parts was the great cooking lesson with Diana and Florence. That felt like a really big moment, because basically this character, and maybe I relate to it as one of those post-millennial moms who's always harried, where you're always doing something for someone else and you never say, no, I don't want to do that. And she's like, no, I don't want to be in a cooking lesson with a bossy woman. I'm walking out and doing something else. And it was sort of a minor example, but part of what you are talking about is listening to the voice inside you in large ways, but also in kind of smaller ways, like, how do I want to occupy the space? I mean, that's certainly.
And I think sometimes I'll be talking to people and I'll hear a voice in my head saying, I am trapped, get me out of here. And I used to just stand there and listen, like, okay, I can't listen to that. But now I'm like, I have to go. Like this is the book I wrote about. One of my books, the nonfiction, is it's called The Sober Lush. And it's like personal stories from my friend Jardine and I about making a life after booze. And it's something one of the chapters is called The French Exit, because you can just exit, And so for Reagan, it does seem like a small thing, and you're absolutely right. But for a lot of people to walk out of something they don't want to do is actually impossible.
Well, right. Or it's impossible. And even mentally, it's kind of corollary to the mental kind of traps these various people. And I mean, I'm surprised your editor had never experienced trauma to the degree of not being related to how these people behaved, because for me,
the first draft.
That's true. And I'm sure it became much more overt. But what I'm saying is, I think that one of the things that made this book relatable is no matter who we are, we've experienced something that translates to us into that sort of trauma we can't come out. You know what I mean? It doesn't have. And I think that one of the great things here was that not only that leaving, but how you're going to occupy the space, but also mentally, what people tend to do is pile the pressure on themselves in toxic situations so that they keep feeling they're making the only awful choice they can make. That's what you sort of felt was where a lot of these characters started, and where a lot of that started was, I'm in this terrible traumatic situation, so I'm making the only awful choice I can make, and realizing that if you step away from that context, you don't have to necessarily make that awful choice.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, and one achievement, well, let's see if there are any other questions. So that idea that you could, and how would you define joy, Amanda. This book has a lot of instances of it. And sometimes what I loved, to me, one of the pleasures of seeing them all on the cruise ship was one of the things I would say, I would tell readers I loved in this book is that every situation it felt like they're in can often go bad or not. And sometimes you really saw how people who seemed headed for a conflict or estrangement would kind of move away slightly and end up being really connected.
Yeah. I think,
You know,
I think to answer your question about defining joy, I was at another residency and I only really talk to people now when I go to residencies because I'm also at home with my children. But I met this woman who had been brought up in the Mormon faith, and she was saying, you know, I wonder if I'll ever find people who really know me and love me for who I really am, and I'm seen. And I said, you know, in my case, I made a family where that's the, you know, I made that world for myself. It wasn't given to me, but I made it. And you're a part of that. You know, that time in Montana was the first time I felt. So that to me is a definition of joy. It's allowing yourself to really see and around people who see you and love you for who you are. And you don't have to say, I want to be here. You don't have to pretend you're a certain way. You know, so there's two pieces of that. It's allowing, it's hearing who you are, allowing yourself to be seen. But anyway, when you get there or ever in that situation, that to me is joy. And it's sometimes not awesome.
No, but I love that because I feel like it kind of ties in really neatly with what you've been saying about the creative process, because I've been trying to sort of articulate that to myself. I mean, we're all people who've been, you know, you and I both, Amanda, in our separate fields of poetry and have been writing a fairly long time. And I would say, like you, I feel like a lot of my early poetry was very much, you know, trying to be some poet that I had in my head that wasn't necessarily the poet I really am. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sort of scrabbling patiently toward that more authentic voice. But I had this revelation when you were talking earlier that, you know, what do we love about writing we love? It's this feeling that we are encountering somebody, warts and all, that not this perfect person, but a true human voice of a writer, you know, that is willing to be very much this, you know, not write every sentence beautifully. In the end, that doesn't add up to great writing necessarily, you know.
You're such a great moderator, because
I am not. But I'm saying,
during
but we're having fun because we're, you know, we've known each other a long time. But anyway, similarly,
during the snowpocalypse here in Texas,
I know.
Stuck in a hotel room. I was lucky to be in a hotel room, but I had taken out from the library 4 Elizabeth Strout books. So I read them all at the same time.
I love her too.
Master class, but she is so kind to her characters. And Olive Kittredge is very unpleasant, you know, but she's so kind to them.
But you know, I love that in fiction.
That's my goal next, to do more.
And you've always been very kind to your characters or generous to them. But I think that sometimes can, you know, I think we grew up in that sort of post-punk rock era, Amanda, where, you know, the meaner and tougher you could be, the better. Like everyone was supposed to be like, you know, such a horrible character and an extreme character. And it took me a long time. And I kind of feel like it's a feminist thing too, to say, well, what's wrong with being kind to your characters to some degree? They don't have to be lovely people all the way through, but you want to love their humanity a little, I think.
Absolutely. And that to me is the goal for the work I want to do.
And this book really did that for me. I'm still brooding about, I like Lee. I like them all. But I'm, you know, I actually really wanted to know where they went from here, which was a great thing to me. And you know what? We are at time.
Well, so you know, let me say, you'll get to find out, because it's going to be a TV show that's just going to keep going off the ship. So.
Yeah, but you don't get to write them all.
Oh, yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
Oh, well, that makes me much happier, because I do have to admit, I've watched many TV shows where they started with a book and then they got in somebody else to write it. And I can always tell, Amanda, when it goes off the writer of the book. Haven't you experienced that? And suddenly you're like, I really
now is, why do they all have to be white, which they are a family, but we don't want them all to be white. So it's like very hard to deal with that problem because they're related.
Oh, well, it sounds, but it's going to be so fun because I do want to find out what happens to them all. And it was really fun. And I am going to just read the last comment by Allison that speaks for all of us. It says, "Hi, Allison." It says, "Love the book. Thanks for the discussion." And Allison, you're speaking to a true believer here. Can't wait for Giovanni in Hawaii. Me neither, Amanda.
Literally just pitched it and they said no, but you know.
Oh, well, they're wrong. You know, we're your little chorus here. And you know, you can do what you want. And I say yes to Giovanni in Hawaii. Yes.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you so much, you guys.
I just wanted to pipe in for just a second and thank Amanda for spending time with us tonight, and Sheila, what a wonderful conversation. I think all of us felt really fed by it. And so Sheila, thanks for the great questions. And Amanda, thank you so much for telling us all about the jet setters. I love your definition of joy. And just thanks everyone for joining us. I am putting in who is coming next. Oh, sorry. Am I muted, everyone? Okay, sorry. I'm just putting in our next featured author in June, which is Rebecca Manley, with our guest moderator, Amy Gentry. Just keep a lookout for that. Sign up for the RSVP. And thank you so much for being with us. This was great. Okay. So,
Good night.
thanks, Amanda.
Amanda, it was so fun, except I asked you the longest, most rambling questions. So thank you.
Incredible. I gotta run, but I call me tomorrow.
Thank
Okay,
you, Amanda.
bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Amanda.
you guys.
Bye.
This is great.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Great